Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Masters, and I'm super excited to have Donna Van Roy here to present a session, and I'll introduce her in just a little bit, but I always like to come on the line a few minutes early and welcome our early birds. So I recognize a few names out there. Hi, Carly, and there's Frank and Linda. Good to have you guys with us. If you already know where the question box is and want to introduce yourself using the question box, let us know where you're calling in from, what the weather's like there today, and we're having a nice cool spell here in Arizona. It is, this morning I think it was in the 50s, and maybe we'll get up to the 80s today, so I'm loving it. It's Friday, yay! Hey, for those who are just joining, there's a little raise hand button on your control panel. And raise your hand if you're going to the site conference. Thank you, Carly. Let's see, who's going to the site conference? You guys are missing out. Raise your hand if you're going to the site conference. All right, I knew there was at least one. Jordana, good to have you there. And I'll be there. And so will Donna. So very, very excited to have her join us in San Antonio. So Frank is calling in from Lawrence, Kansas, recovering from storms. I think I saw something going through there. And hi, Carly. Um, oh, okay. So Amy is replacing Carly. Okay, good to have you here, Amy. That's great. Oh my gosh, Linda, I'm going to be bummed to not see you at the site conference. Oh, she's calling in from Wisconsin over there in West Bend, and I guess it's 40s and overcast. Oh boy. Well, hey, even if you're not going to the site conference, if you want to join in and network using the guidebook and learn how to use mobile device screen share apps, I'm going to do a webinar on June 2nd so we can come and talk about the different mobile device screen share apps. I'm using one called SiteSync right now, and I know apps are usually made easy to learn for people. You can just install them and just start using them, but there may be a situation where you want to do a screen share with a mobile device such as an iPad or a smartphone like an iPhone, or I have an Android device. And so we're going to play around with those mobile device screen share apps, and hope you can join us on June 2nd. And I'm also going to talk about the networking with the guidebook app that we're going to use at the conference this year. And I'm thinking that they're not restricting it to those who are attending the conference. I'll have to confirm that, but that would be pretty cool if we can get a lot of people networking and getting involved using that guidebook app. So for those of you who are just joining us, we never assume that people know how to use the GoToWebinar interface, so I'm just going to show you a few little tricks here. You should be watching on your desktop here, and we want your complete attention because this is interactive. We're going to ask you questions, maybe unmute lines, but you have a control panel if you're using a PC on the right, and you'll see a little orange arrow that opens and closes the control panel. And it looks like maybe half of you are dialed in via the phone and half of you are through mic and speakers. And again, if you've got a lot of apps open on your computer, your VoIP might degrade a little bit, so try to close everything, especially email and other browsers, and the VoIP audio should be nice and clear for you. I like to tell people to uncheck the auto hide control panel, this little check mark here, because then it keeps this control panel open on your screen. And the reason why you want it open is this is where you can change your audio. If you want to switch to the telephone, you would just click on the radial button for telephone, dial the phone number that's shown on your screen, the access code, and then of course the PIN is important because if you put in that PIN, that's what allows me to unmute you. And then this question box is where I wanted you to enter where you're calling in from. So for those who just joined, if you haven't introduced yourself, please type into the question box now in your control panel. Tell us where you're calling in from. and what's the weather like where you are, and then whether you're going to the site conference. I'll be there, and so will Donna, so I'll introduce her in just a moment. So there's the raise hand button on the control panel, and then down here you see handouts. There's a little triangle next to handouts, and there's 3 of them. Great information that Donna Van Roy is going to be sharing today. So you just click on the file and download it. It will open it up in a browser window on your computer, and then you can save it to your computer. So, all right, Sherry, welcome from Massachusetts, sunny. Oh, I'm bummed I won't see you at site. Kristen, Seattle. All right, sunny and clear. Unusual for Seattle. Jennifer, welcome. Columbus, Ohio. Andrea, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Excellent. Evelyn, oh no. Oh, I'm going to be so bummed this year. So glad you can join us though today. Peggy's in Wisconsin, Elizabeth, Louisville, Svetlana, hello. Yay, I'm so glad you'll be there. Kansas City. This is great. And Tanya, Cleveland, Ohio. Hello, Mandy from Cincinnati. Ooh, gloomy there. And Arthur, you better be in San Antonio. You better be. And then Deborah. Oh, Chandler. Yes. Hi, Deb. Yes, I met her at a CPCU meeting recently, so welcome. And then Christina. Excellent. 44 in Wisconsin. So happy that you guys took time to introduce yourself. I want to let you know a little bit about SITE. Society of Insurance Trainers and Educators is excited that you're with us today. We want you to consider ways to get more involved with SITE, whether it's by joining as a member, or if you're already a member, find ways to grow more with SITE by getting involved. We'd love for you to do a webinar if you have an expertise you'd like to share with fellow members. SITE has unlimited benefits of membership, and as you can see on the screen, we'd love for you to get connected today. SITE's a great place to network with people in similar roles as yours, and professional networking has a way of becoming a great tool when you least expect it. The relationships you sow today may yield success in the future. So visit our website at the bottom of the screen. It's insurancetrainers.org. You can find out about membership information, and we hope you will get involved. Now this is very exciting. We have Donna Van Roy joining us today, and just as a introduction for Donna, she's going to be presenting a session on scenario-based instruction at the SITE conference. We're so excited, but it's a little bit different than what we're doing here today. This is kind of a foundation, and so Donna, tell us a little bit about how your session is going to be different at the SITE conference for those who are going.
Okay, thank you, Sandra, and hello to everybody on the phone. So the session at the conference, which I am thrilled to be at, is a little different in that I'm going to be there with one of our vendor partners, and we're going to take a little bit deeper dive and go through some of the methodology that they use in needs analysis and building scenarios, and then we're going to take a look at some of the actual web-based courses that we built, and having the group have a chance to use kind of that methodology in creating some scenarios for themselves. So it'll be fun. I will have a partner in crime who is very engaging. So for those of you who are attending, I would encourage, come on and stop by on Tuesday morning when we'll be there. Well, I'll be there the whole time, but
excellent.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We're excited that you're here with us today to share your expertise. So let's get them started.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I did not respond, but I am here from beautiful Cleveland, Ohio, and we went from a normal Northeast Ohio from 85 degrees yesterday to 50 degrees today, but at least it's sunny.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, so the weather looks good. So it's great to hear where everyone's from. It's so cool that we have so many locations represented. Another thing that I thought would be great for the group today, too, is to find out what role you're in at your organization. And Sandra, I was thinking as we created this, so if everyone can kind of pick their role, we probably should have made it something that was like check all that apply, because I know we have, everybody has different hats. So maybe it's your primary role in your organization.
All right, so we have 71% of the people have weighed in so far. We try to get to like 85% before we close the poll, so last chance to weigh in. Just click on the radial button on your screen. 5, 4. This is the way we get you involved. This is audience participation. Last chance. 3, 2. Yay, we got to 86%. Okay, so I'll close the poll and I'll share the results. And it looks like we have 30% are instructional designers, 10% training managers, 43% training specialists, 7% facilitators, and 10% other. And you're welcome to use the question box. If you picked other, what is that other? We'd love to know. So thanks. All right, I'll hide that poll and we'll move on.
Okay, great. Well, good. We have a nice variety of people in different roles, and it seems like most of you probably have had your hand in either creating scenarios or being part of that design process where you're working with subject matter experts to really create some engaging content. So I think the next question here is really kind of to get a sense from everybody on your experience in using scenarios. So, you know, primarily which area are you using scenarios? Is it with instructor-led courses, web-based, use them in both, or haven't really dabbled in the use of scenarios recently?
All right.
And I think, you know, while everyone's answering that, maybe too, you know, where you're using scenarios, meaning what type of training do you work with? Is it product more specific for maybe insurance products, sales, IT type training, just to get a sense of who we have here on the call today?
Yeah, so feel free to use the question box that if you are currently using your scenarios in instructor-led or web-based, what kind of training do you do? Is it IT training, underwriting training, sales training, claims training? We're just kind of curious. So looks like we got to 94% of the people who voted. Last chance to weigh in on the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we got 94%. Let me share these results. So we had 18% use scenarios in instructor-led courses, 21% web-based training, and then 42% use them for both, and then 18% generally don't use scenarios. So it's nice that you're here because I know that Donna is going to inspire you to want to create your first scenario and test it out on your audience, either live or virtual. So that's great. Thank you so much. And look at this. A lot of people weighed in on the area of training. So we've got product, underwriting, product and sales, IT software and contracts, mostly underwriting, onboarding, that's great, systems training, pre-licensing, continuing ed, underwriting. So thank you everyone for weighing in and giving us a little bit more information. So what do you think, Donna?
I think that's great. And I was not surprised at some of the responses of using scenarios. I don't think, you know, scenarios aren't new to our world in training, design, and delivery. And I will say for today's session, maybe a little disclaimer, I will not say that I am here as an expert sharing everything about building scenarios and training, but I will say that what I love about CITE, and Sandra, what you said is really this is an organization about peers sharing with peers. So what I'm sharing today is really some insights that I have from my experiences, and then also some content curation that I have done in preparing for this. So I really hope that you know, as we continue through today's hour, that people can continue to weigh in on the questions, ask questions, provide your feedback, because that's really how today's session will benefit. And kind of unlike the image that I have here where there's only one light bulb on, I hope at the end of today's session that we all have a light bulb that goes off and that we can take away one thing to either enhance what we're doing today with scenarios, or really maybe take a chance and start using some Okay, can you hear me? Sandra, are we good on the sound?
Yes, we are. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So to kind of start us off, I want to start with a little bit definition of what scenario-based learning is. And there are a few definitions out there. If you look and do a little research, the one that I really like is from Dr. Clark's book. You see the source on the bottom of the slide here, but also this is listed in the resource handout that Sandra pointed out. This is one of the 2 books that I would highly recommend if you want to learn more. They're fantastic resources. And what I liked about this definition is it's very simple and really points out what is unique about scenario-based learning, and that is that it engages the learner and they really become part of the learning process. They're taking action, making mistakes, and really learning from those mistakes and reflecting on them. So they're a very active part of the learning process, which is a little different than some of the other instructional strategies that we use. So situational or scenario-based learning isn't always for every type of learning objective. This was kind of an excerpt from Dr. Clark's book where they compare the difference between pure scenario-based instruction and then how scenarios are used in traditional instruction. So I kind of highlighted a few areas that jumped out that I think reflect the difference when we talk about scenario-based learning. And one of them is the top one here, the role of the scenario. So in scenario-based instruction, the scenario really becomes the context of learning. So that is the first thing that a learner is exposed to, is that scenario. And it's sometimes termed maybe case study, problem-based learning. So that is the focus of where the learning is derived from. Where in traditional instruction, we do use scenarios, but in those sessions, it's more about the application of maybe what was taught before or the reinforcement of content that was delivered before. So you'll see on the bottom on when to use pure scenario-based instruction. It's really in those cases where that learning group already has some content and the objectives of the learning is more to build critical thinking and problem-solving skills. And that, a really good example that I tend to have conversations about are when we talk about 200, 300 level courses. I work a lot with our underwriting group, and many times, they'll say, well, we need 200 or 300 level courses, and it's not the process that's different, it's just the complexity that's happening at that mastery level, and it's really engaging those critical thinking skills. So that's a good example of where pure scenario-based instruction can be used. Another slight difference that we'll see in pure scenario-based instruction is that the role of the learner. So here's an example of sometimes taking it from conceptual to more of an example, kind of shows the difference. And this is an example from a new manager instructor-led course. And in this course, scenarios are currently being used. And they're generally being used, I think, on the more traditional side where content is provided and then the participant or the learner is asked to use that scenario to analyze behavior of a manager. Where in reflecting on it, if we were to redesign that into a purely scenario-based instruction, a unique part of it is that the learner is really part of the decision making. So instead of analyzing a situation, the learner becomes part of making those decisions. So it can be a slight distinction, but what happens in the learning process for that participant is now they become much more active. So they're using the knowledge that they have from before and trying to apply it to maybe a new situation. And So I think the point on this part in distinguishing between scenario-based instruction and scenarios and traditional instruction is that we don't have to necessarily blow up everything that we do today. The learning comes from the fact that we're using scenarios today, and maybe as we look at the elements that are part of scenario-based learning, the scenarios that we have in our instruction today can be maybe more effective or used in a different way to engage our learners more. So the elements, the 5 elements or 5 C's of scenario-based learning are presented here, and they're also in the handout that Sandra shared yesterday and that is also on the webinar today. And this really comes from, there's a blog post that is in the resource guide that talked about the 3 C's of a good scenario, and I believe there's really 5 C's of a good scenario. But before we get to the 5 C's, the first part is really defining that learning objective up front. So based on the learning objective, what we want the participants to get out of the training, that will tell us whether this is appropriate for a scenario-based instructional design. If that is the case, then the next part is really defining what is that scenario that can help the learners achieve that objective. And the first part is the challenge. So what is that problem? What is the situation or the situation that people are in that we want them to make better decisions around? And then as we begin to get more into it, then there's the context. What's that story in which they're making those decisions? And then number 3 and number 4 are really where I feel like it's where I see some of the work that I've been doing can be elaborated on, is focusing on the choice and the consequence. So to employ more critical thinking and problem solving skills in our scenarios, really infusing where are those critical decision making points and what are the options that are generally pursued and what are the consequences. So, you know, where are people commonly following those mistakes in their decision making? The other part of the scenario-based learning that kind of encompasses the whole process is this aspect of coaching. Now this looks like feedback, and maybe in an instructor-led scenario it is feedback by the instructor or by their peers. It's also resources that are available to our learners to help them make decisions. And this also can be feedback that's given more in a web-based environment where there is feedback when a question is answered or a decision is made. So that can happen at any point in the scenario, but it's an important aspect that has to be built and thought through when designing a scenario. So to kind of look at, I want to take a couple of examples where we see these 5 C's come into play. And the first one is in a web-based design. Now in this case, a little bit of background on the flow here. We have a number of courses that we work with our safety department on, and one of those, and you'll see some of this in the conference if you attend, is around active threat. So in the new course that we're building, we are building some more scenario-based instruction in there, and this is kind of an excerpt of one of the points. And I thought it was a good example of some of the C's. So the first C here is the challenge, and the challenge in this web-based training is to be able to react appropriately to the active shooter situation. The context in which this is being played out is that there is an active threat situation in the office building. When we look at next our choices, those are in the green boxes here that are being built in. And in the one that's pointed out here, the first choice is, what will you do? Hide, shout, or run? So in that decision, I'm choosing to run in this example. And then in this case, we're brought with another decision. So here I'm asked, where do I run? Do I run the emergency exit, main hall, or hallway? And then in the next part of the flow, we see where that consequence of my decision. So my first decision brought me to a second decision. My second decision brought me to some consequences. And each one of these consequences in the full flow is played out in full length. But as you can see here, based on where I went, my decision, my consequence is different. So throughout the training that you don't see in this area too, there are some options for coaching that the learner can access. But instead of explaining what to do, it's putting them in an active role in making decisions and seeing what happens with those decisions. In your resource handout that's there, there's another excellent illustration of how this is done in an e-learning environment. And this is not a new example. It's been out there for a while, but it's an app that you can download called Lifesaver CPR. And again, it's a great example where it's teaching CPR skills through scenarios and video and decisions and consequences. So it is a great illustration for 8 to 10 minutes to see how this can be played out in a web-based environment for different topics. The other example that I wanted to share on how scenario-based learning can be used with the 5 Cs is, in an example, this is an instructor-led example that was for a claim system training. So the background on this was that we were putting in a new system for the claims process. So all of our users were experienced claims professionals, but using a new system and having some different processes associated with it. So in the instructor-led portion, prior to attending the instructor-led portion, there was some web-based training on the navigation of the new system, but what was unique for the design for us is in that face-to-face component, the whole course itself was purely built on scenarios or claims to be processed. So with the training environment that we had, the course had 10 or so different claims that those individuals had to process. And the decisions that were made were based on how they would use the system and how that played out into the processing of the claim. And for each claim, we started with a simple claim with more guidance and more structure. And then as the students progressed in the course, they were going through more complex claims, and we pulled the guidance away. So by the end of the course, they were processing a claim as they would in their real environment. And the facilitator in this case really became a coach that walked through the room, helping the individuals go through the process. So this was a different design for us for a new system, and it worked very effectively because the individual were able to go at their own pace, but also we infused other components of a real-life situation with random phone calls where the work had to be stopped, and looking at really experiencing what a workload or workflow would look like with multiple claims in their queue. So that's just an example of how, in both cases, in a web-based training and systems training, scenarios can be the beginning or the basis of the learning context. And in the pure sense of scenario-based training, that's one key element in this visual is it starts with the learner making a decision and continues to get feedback and consequences and more decisions throughout that active learning process. And so I kind of want to stop here and ask the group maybe if you can respond in your questions. Many of the scenarios that I talked about, and probably with your experience in using scenarios, is that there may be some challenges or pushback that you might experience. So in the question box, if you can maybe share some of your experiences in using scenarios what were some of the challenges that you faced in either the design process or the implementation, or even just a suggestion of using scenarios versus maybe a more traditional approach? So I'll give a few minutes there. Sandra, any responses or challenges that we see out there?
Yeah, you know, Michelle weighed in saying it's very time consuming to build. And Linda shared, you know, new concepts, attendees unclear of how to start. And I know as an attendee, when I've had to do scenarios, if they're really not well thought out and built correctly, you could get very confused about what the whole context and purpose is. Evelyn said they've suggested scenarios, but they've had pushback from the managers because there are multiple scenarios that may be involved in a situation. There is always, right? Yeah, so great point there. Deb said the tool that they're using at the time didn't support anything but a positive or negative feedback, no ability to branch. So some of these, you know, you may have to think of the scenario outside the context of the technology that you're using. What do you think about that, Donna? I mean, do you have to
that's
have a
very good.
technology tool to build a scenario?
No, absolutely not. I think in an example that I presented, it can be built in things like Storyline, but without that, you don't have to have the technology drive it, but it will take more time to design how you could construct the scenario so it can only use the yes or no or correct or incorrect feedback. Mm-hmm. So I would agree with the comment that it is very time consuming, and the actual design and communication of that scenario is critical, whether it's web-based or also in the instructor-led mode. Mm-hmm. So all those points are correct. I think the handout with the 5 C's for me has helped me kind of, one, focus conversation on what are the elements that I really need in the scenario so it doesn't get too big where we're losing the context of what the purpose of what the learning is. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also helpful, too, for the subject matter experts as they begin to work with it more can start to think in that mode. I also agree. I many times sit in a room with somebody that said, oh, this is just too complicated. I can't tell you every nuance of what happens in our decision making. So as we work with the business and maybe try and have a success or two, then they start to think in the same mode. In the in the systems training example that I shared, it took a long time to get those first few scenarios down. Mm-hmm. But once everybody knew what the process was, mm-hmm. our subject matter experts could do them in their sleep. They knew exactly, they were in a mode. Yeah. So, but there is a hurdle there.
There are lots of greats coming in, and I think the framework that you provided will help Christine, and you might want to comment on this. She said there's so many possible decisions and consequences. She struggles with limiting these, not sure where to start and how to control the process. Yeah,
I think for me what has helped a bit with this needs is focusing them on what are the most common mistakes, and then going backwards to what are the decisions that people are making where those mistakes are happening. Mm-hmm. So it's not every decision in the process, but looking at where do people commonly trip up when they're talking to an agent and they have to, and they're not going to renew. What do you see as a Where are they tripping up? And so that then kind of working backward, those are the decisions that we're going to focus the scenario on, not every decision in the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tanya made the comment, she thinks it would be helpful for me to be able to share data with her coworkers that suggest going this route using scenarios will be more effective than traditional learning. Without that, it's just an idea. So any ideas on thoughts for convincing the colleagues that, you know, when you're working with the subject matter experts to just go the scenario route?
Yeah. Well, there's in the next slide, there are some, we can look at research. So that's not always a good selling point for some groups, but there are different learning theories that support the idea of scenario-based learning. So here I just pulled out a few. You know, we all are very familiar with adult learning theory and practice, and this truly every point or principle in adult learning this supports. It engages the person in the learning process. It's about problem solving. It is very self-directed. They're really learning as they go with their peers. And I'll go to the other quadrant on the bottom there, is really the learning theory that learners construct their own knowledge and are able to use, it helps them in building their long-term retention. So if I'm pulling on something that I already know, I'm using that to add information or challenge my assumptions, that's going back to my long-term memory, and I'm building that kind of, not scaffolding, but that information that I have. So active learning is another learning theory that supports scenario-based learning, because the more we're engaged, especially in problem solving, the more that it will retain, there'll be long-term retention and there'll be engagement. In the resource list, there is an infographic that highlights the benefits of scenario-based learning in probably a more marketing way than something that's more academic in a learning theory way. I don't know if there's others. I'd be curious to hear from others on the phone who are using scenarios, how they have been able to kind of sell people on the idea of using those more in the instructional design.
Yeah, so go ahead. If you want to raise your hand and be unmuted to share a comment regarding how you use scenarios and how you're able to convince others, I think that would be helpful. So I'll look for a raised hand. We do have some other great comments coming in and questions too. Let's see here. Let's see. I just want to make sure I'm doing these correctly. Let's see, Judy says, I think an important role of scenario-based training is learning and the thought process of making a decision. And Evelyn comments, if we're using case studies at the end of the program now, how is that different than using it at the start of the course than using that for continued training on other potential situations that might come up? So is there a rule about using them at the beginning and throughout versus the end, or does it matter, or does it depend on the subject?
Well, I think in the truest sense of scenario-based learning structure, the case study itself is the basis of the learning. So starting at, and I think it's more, we may think of it as maybe in your undergraduate or graduate, more at a college level, there might be those courses where it's at the end of your education and it's all about looking at case studies and making decisions or recommendations. And so in that case, using the case study at the beginning, it's we're not necessarily directing content to them, but allowing them to find it for themselves in either making a proposal or decision on that case. So I think maybe, thinking off the top of my head, an example might be if in a course the first thing that we did was give somebody a application to underwrite. And they have some underwriting experience, but maybe this isn't an area that they're not as exposed to. Maybe it's a vertical in the industry that they're not as exposed to, which has different things different risks that they need to look at, different classifications. So in that case, we just presented at the beginning, and the role of the facilitator is to help, maybe they're in small groups, guide that decision-making process or point them to information that will help them in making the decisions in the steps that they do for that particular underwriting. I'm probably not explaining it well because I'm going off the cuff here.
No, I think that's fine. And Evelyn kind of weighed in too. She wasn't really like challenging beginning or ending, but like was trying to make the point to bring to managers, you know, I guess getting managers involved. So Evelyn, if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to unmute your line. Evelyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make was that, hey, if you're already making case studies at the end, so what's the difference if we're calling it a case study or a scenario-based training? So just, you know, basically what you're doing is kind of transitioning in that case study that you would normally use at the end, which is usually addresses one particular situation, right? That's instead of multiple situations. I know that some people were saying that was the issue, but you're bringing that to the beginning and having them kind of self-explore some possibilities. And my thought was, you know, I can say to a manager, we're going to start with a case study. Maybe don't call it scenario-based training because maybe that freaks them out or something. But just, you know, using that to kind of reinforce the message that we use it at the end to help them learn. Why not start with that to help them do some self-discovery? So
that's great.
That was kind of my point.
Yeah,
great. That is excellent. You did a much better way to frame that, but you're right. Yeah, using it at the beginning to have them self-explore and actively figure out, what do I already know, what don't I know, how do I find out what that is?
I believe Frank wants to weigh in too, so I'm going to unmute his line, put him on the spot. So Frank, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, Sandra, what we've done at our company is we've actually developed a series of online modules kind of to lay a foundational base, and specifically in this case, commercial lines insurance, and require the participants to complete these online modules. And then they are invited to come to a workshop. It's completely up to them. It's an optional workshop, but if they want to come and practice the skills that they've actually acquired, hopefully, in those online modules, we've actually, that is, the whole workshop is case studies, and we break them up into small groups and have them actually work through the case studies. And then one of the case studies, the last one, there's actually 3 in this 2-day workshop. We actually have them put the whole case study together, and you know, from eligibility to underwriting to quoting it to making recommended coverages, and then actually have them do a sales presentation in a group setting, and then we provide them feedback. So the facilitator / instructor is there to provide assistance for the groups as they're working on their case studies, but the real the learning is them working together on this and then actually having to complete a sales presentation. So we've gotten some really good positive feedback on those workshops. So.
That is excellent. And I know as a trainer facilitator, I have more fun using scenarios or case studies where you kind of weave it through the class and they're doing all the work. And those, in my experience, have been the best programs because they're like teaching each other, and all you do is you're guiding them and facilitating them. So
I would wholeheartedly agree. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Any comment, Donna, on Frank's the way he uses them?
I think that's excellent. That I guess when you, since some of the questions or comments that came up before, I would ask, how did you go about determining what those cases were? Like, what was your process for that?
So as a company, we've obviously got some target markets that we've focused on as an organization. So we developed those case studies around 3 different target market risks that we're really focusing in on. So we had some input from our subject matter experts and some folks from the line. So they had a lot of input on the creation of those case studies.
That's awesome.
And,
Thank you.
and during the, yeah, that is great.
So Donna, we had another
you.
comment from Arthur, and this is kind of a concern I have too, is he makes the comment in highly regulated educational environments such as pre-licensing education, scenario-based training is sometimes difficult to adapt to the courses that are approved on the basis of word count, among other factors. So if you're dealing with CE for agents or adjusters, also, you know, low pricing of pre-license makes it the cost of designing such training prohibitive. So yet, you know, he sees that there's benefits to using the scenario based. Have you ever had to deal with that context? As you know, I think about certification exams and licensing exams, people are preparing for a multiple choice exam. So how can you use scenario based when the assessment piece is going to be a multiple choice exam? Any ideas there? And I'll throw it out to the audience as well if you want to weigh in.
I have not been involved in some of the restrictions that were mentioned. I guess my feedback would be in the, not in the assessment part, but in the design of the learning, if there's opportunity to include more types of maybe just examples or situations that the learner can reflect on that would prepare them for more of a multiple choice assessment, but it would be a strategy to use to help them gain that knowledge.
Yeah. Christine's asking the question, and I'll ask it of you, Donna, but I also, for those that are using scenario-based learning, I'd like you to share in the question box, what tools and technology do you recommend if you're going to get into scenario-based?
I guess my feedback would be we use, it's not a technology, but use the idea of mind mapping is sometimes helpful to get on paper the thought process or the decision making, the situations that people are trying to explain.
All right. Anyone else using any technology tools or concepts, mind mapping? I certainly like your framework where you look at the challenge, the context, the choices, the consequences, and coaching. I like that. Frank says they utilize wireless laptop kits and have participants use electronic resources during the workshop. And Evelyn, they have their own test system to develop scenarios. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Do you use test systems at all, Donna, so that people aren't in the live environment, they're in a test environment where they could go through the processes?
Oh, okay. Oh, and that's okay. Yes, we have, there's a couple of areas where we do have training environments, which is even better than a test environment. And that definitely allows so much more opportunity in instructional design to be able to use scenarios.
That's awesome.
Okay, I want to transition a little bit to our next poll and say this is great conversation. I'm so happy to be a part of it. And the first polling question here is, as we looked at, we talked about scenarios and some of the challenges, but when you look at those 5 C's, and what you're doing today, where do you feel that you need to enhance some of those elements? Is there one element that you would like to enhance to improve on those scenarios?
I know. Yeah, so go ahead and take some time to indicate a choice. We're forcing you to make a choice because we kind of have a follow-on question. We're going to ask you about this. For me, I think the context based on my experience, but I don't want to pre-lead anyone. Let's see what others say. All right, we've got 39% voted. We're having people stray away here. So challenges, the context, the choices, the consequences, or the coaching. I imagine coaching would be a big area too, but this is interesting. Last chance to weigh in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we were able to get another 10% or up to 73% who voted. All right, so 21% they want to focus on the challenge, 25% context, 21% choices, 21% consequences. This is like almost a dead even split, 13% on the coaching. Interesting.
So then I guess the next leading question is what we want to enhance. What do you find to be the most difficult part of creating those scenarios?
Let me just open up the poll here for you. So you've told us which area you'd like to improve. Which area do you think is the most difficult area? This is interesting. Ah, interesting. Okay, last chance to weigh in. Let's see if we can at least get to the, we did, we got to our 73%. So we know exactly what percentage of the audience, oh, we got to 76%. All right. This one, the coaching and context came out to be the most difficult. Whereas, you know, coaching I think was 13% on the previous one, that they want to improve their coaching, and 24% came out one of the higher results for one of the more difficult parts. What makes coaching so difficult for you, Donna?
I think it's the fact that when subject matter experts, when we're interviewing them, they don't realize what coaching they provide or what resources they're accessing when they're in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, unless it's a system or not even a job aid, sometimes we end up talking with the more experienced subject matter expert where they don't use any of these resources anymore. They just know it.
Mm.
And trying to get them to think about that, for me, is very, very hard to get.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear what other people on a call, some of, you know, why they feel even context and coaching is the most difficult, or what. So I'm not sure if folks can still respond here on the questioning. Same question, why do you feel the context is, or coaching is the most difficult?
Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll unmute your line. We love it when we hear from our site members and guests who are here. So don't be afraid. Use the raise hand button on your grab handle on the control panel, and I'll unmute your line. While we're waiting for a brave volunteer, Sherry had a question. When you build the scenario, do you call it the 5 C's, or is it just behind the scenes?
It's behind the scenes just to give an outline and process to follow.
A framework. Frameworks are important. Mm-hmm. Framework and process, yeah. Yeah. Linda says the subject matter experts won't know the choices and need to be well versed on all the solutions. That's a good point. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, no brave souls raised their hands, so I guess we'll move on.
Okay. Well, this, I think in both cases, context was the area that we wanted to enhance, and it was the area that's most difficult. And I feel that much of that is really working with the SMEs to be able to get that information. So on the next slide, there's just a few points on some tips on how we can better try and gather that information from our SMEs. I am a firm proponent of looking at other disciplines when gaining best practices, and I think this is a situation where looking at the discipline of storytelling is a great way to enhance our skills in gathering that information on context and choices and consequences. And I think there's, in the resource guide that is listed on the attachment, there's also a video that dissects kind of a scenario-based model and allows, kind of like our 5 C's framework, but provides some questions for subject matter experts to build a scenario that can be replicated in various industries. So that's another resource in there that I think is helpful in this context building. But the ability to be curious about the story and even any insight when other disciplines are looking at storytelling, that's big in leadership now. What are the effective points of a story? How do we gather that? That's really what we're doing here, is we're trying to define that story and the decisions that are made. So I would say from just recommendations on that context part is looking at it from a story perspective. Even the mindset of sitting in a room and saying, tell me the story, can change the dynamic of the information that we gather. And I know we're running to the end of our session here. And Sandra, I still see the quick poll. I'm not sure if everybody else does.
Let's go ahead and hide that. And if you were looking at your slides, you were talking to it's all about the story, making sure you understand the setting. What's the context, the characters, encourage the use of real names. I like that. Looking at the plot, what is creating the challenge and why. This is a great framework to use in developing a scenario. The conflict decision, what are the decision points, what information is needed to make the decision, and then your choices. And then the only thing that's not here is what happened as a result. That's the consequence, right? Mm-hmm. That's great, yeah.
So I think I'll wrap up and just, we mentioned what are some of the common mistakes, and these were actually, we already talked about some of these as far as challenges, and it's really, finding the balance of what to include, and also ensuring that the scenario when we're in the moment in the classroom is explaining it effectively so people truly get the learning that they can from it. And the second bullet is really one that I feel that is kind of a learning for me, is to focus on the important decisions and not get wrapped up in the story. Sometimes I see myself getting wrapped up in the story and not bringing it back to where are the common mistakes, what are those decisions that made those mistakes, and how can we learn from them. So I'm going to end with a quick story of my own, and that is this weekend, I want to tell you the story of my vacuum cleaner. So it's Mother's Day this weekend, and we were getting ready, cleaning the house, and of course in the middle of it, something has to go wrong, and that was my vacuum cleaner broke. And it was an important part of my life because I have 3 kids in a St. Bernard. So I really picked a good vacuum cleaner. I liked my vacuum cleaner, and it broke. So I had a very nice neighbor who lent me theirs. And when I used it, I thought, wow, I really thought I had a great vacuum cleaner, but now that I used hers, this one's even better. Maybe I should actually get it serviced or something. And kind of my point with that is that that was an aha moment for me, and I hope in today's session that in some of the work that you're doing, we all do some great work, but maybe some of the conversation that we learned today or some of the points that we talked about will have us, hopefully you had an aha moment and thought, hey, I'm doing some really good stuff, but maybe there's some things that I could do even better. And so my hope is that today's session gave you that aha moment, and I really appreciate all of the interaction and conversation, and I hope I get to meet some of you face-to-face during my first site conference next month. So thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Donna Van Roy from Westfield Insurance, for sharing your time, talents, and expertise. And we're looking forward to your advanced session on creating scenarios. So if you're going to the site conference in June, it's not too late to join us. And we hope that you can come back for our next webinar on June 2nd. You'll get an invite. And remember, the site webinars are open to anyone, so you could share with your colleagues even if they're not a member of site, and it gives us an opportunity to introduce them to site and maybe get them as a member at some point. So this is great. Hey, if you want to share in the last minute or two, what was your key takeaway from this session? Type it into the question box for those that are still here. Before you dash off, just what's something that was an insight, and just like the vacuum cleaner, the aha that, ooh, I better get mine serviced or get a better vacuum. You find something that works better. Share a key takeaway for us. And we sure do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule on a Friday to join us. So Linda is sharing start with scenarios. Ending, sometimes you don't have time for them. Start with them, right? Because in the end, you're rushing. I like that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Arthur liked the structure that you suggested and the consideration. So thanks, Arthur. Carol sharing in our instructor-led training, we could start with a story that would tie into the hands-on scenarios. Excellent, excellent. Evelyn really enjoyed the resources. Thank you for that, and the comparison of the scenarios with traditional instruction. That was great. Very good. Peggy starting with the scenarios instead of ending with them. Catherine, the concept of creating an environment for students to live in rather than just a scenario they're watching. I like that. Excellent.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Christine really appreciated
the term live in.
Yes, absolutely. Live in. Live, quote, unquote. Let's see here. Christine really appreciated the format and the layout with the 5 C's. And a lot of people, they don't have the framework. They don't have the process. But once you practice with the framework and process a little bit, you'll never go back to developing instruction without some kind of scenario. Deb said she's actually building a scenario-based course for their catastrophe adjusters now, and this whole session was great, and the 5 C's form is perfect. So great, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Tanya, her key takeaway was that they should ask subject matter expert what the most common mistakes are related to the problem and what decisions lead people there. That information guides the scenario. Excellent, excellent. And then Deb also shared the idea of looking for the resources to find the answer as well. Very good. Excellent. Well, thanks again so much, Donna and Westfield Insurance, for sharing you with us. And I look forward to meeting you in San Antonio. Thanks, everyone.